Hey everyone, welcome to That's Cakeable. I'm Janine, and this week I thought I would do one of those things that we all think of but just never do. You know, a chili pepper in a sombrero, right? All right? Maybe not. Actually, it was my son-in-law that gave me the idea for this cake, which makes sense because he's a bit weird, so you know. Anyway, that being said, I'm glad I went with it because it was so much fun. Okay, so I made this cake in Rice Krispie treats, so it's not technically a cake, but I will show you partway through the video how to structure it with cake if you were to use cake. On to making our Mexican chili pepper wearing a sombrero, and I hope you really enjoy it. Okay, so as you can see, this guy is built on a structure. Now, if you want to learn a bit more about how I make my structures, you can watch this video up in the corner. Just press the I. But I have used some threaded rod, and I've used a baseboard with feet on the threaded rod, and then I've used some armature wire to make the arms. Then I used Rice Krispie treats to build up the general shape of the body. Okay, let's stop it right here. And I will show you right now how you would build this if it was cake. So I would put a board here, and I would put a board here, and maybe another board here because it's a long cake. I would build up the top with Rice Krispie treats and the part at the bottom with rice cereal treats also. And that is how I would make this as a cake. Okay, let's continue. So once I had the general shape, I wrapped it up in some plastic wrap and set it aside. If you'd like my Rice Krispie cereal recipe, just head over to my website and you will find it there. Okay, now I needed to make the base for the sombrero in advance because it had to dry. So I've taken a 50-50 mix of modeling chocolate and fondant in a light goldy yellow color. And then I found this bowl that is like a soup bowl, so it is low and dipped but reasonably flat on the bottom. I covered in vegetable shortening, but then found later on that it was actually still sticking. So I ended up swapping that out for some plastic wrap. I then just set that aside to dry. Now to make the top of the sombrero, I've used rice cereal treats. Once again, you could use cake, but I think rice cereal treats would probably hold up better. And I'm just matching it up on that base to make sure it's the right size, and I pop that aside to dry also. Okay, so our main shape is all set and ready for carving. As you can see, I'm using a template, so I've got a general idea of what shape I'm going for, and I can't recommend highly enough that you use templates when you're sculpting cakes. There we go. When I'm happy with the final shape, I start using chocolate ganache to give it a good icing coat, and then I use my flexi scraper, just a piece of acetate scraper, to make it all smooth and even. These are excellent with shaped cakes, rounded cakes, spherical cakes, etc. Now I wanted to put a nose on this little guy, but I wanted to put it underneath the fondant, so I just popped it on where I wanted it, and there he is, ready to cover. Okay, so I just covered this guy in some white fondant, and I actually ended up wrapping him. In hindsight, I probably would have done this slightly differently. I probably would have put a slit up the bottom on each side, but it didn't work out too badly. And you know, it's all a learning experience. Then I smoothed him out, joined all the seams, cut the top off. You won't see the seam at the top because his hat will be covering it. And then I cut off the excess from the back. And then I used a couple of smoothing methods, including using some fondant on the fondant to smooth it out until I was happy with the finished result. I've just marked in where his mouth is going. That's where his bottom lip is, his teeth, and inside his mouth. So I am going to define that bottom lip just slightly because I want it jutting out a little bit. And then I'm depressing the inside a little bit because I want that recessed inwards rather than outwards. To make his arms, as you can see, I have moved the other arm into a different position, which you can do once it's covered. I just took some fondant, covered the armature, and cut off the excess. To make his hand, I just took a teardrop piece of fondant, cut a small triangle into it to make like a little thumb, and then attached it to the end of the arm. Did that on the other side. And now he's ready to paint. So my airbrush mucked up a little bit doing this. It got a bit splittery and splattery, so I may or may not have bought a new one once I've finished filming this. First coat I did was an orange coat, an orange base coat, and then I went over him with a nice fire engine red. To define certain areas, more shadows, I've used some brown to do some shadowing. Now to make the mouth, I've taken a very thin piece of white fondant and just pressed it against where I'd made the indents and cut around the inner mouth shape. I then coloured that with some maroon sort of coloured paste mixed with some alcohol. It almost looked the same colour here, but it wasn't. To make his tongue, I just made sort of a heart-shaped piece of pink fondant and pop that down on the bottom right-hand corner. And then finally for his teeth, I took like a semicircle piece of white fondant and popped that on top. There's his little mouth. Okay, on to making the moustache. Now I made a couple of versions of this before I was happy. You're actually seeing one of the first versions. So I took a piece of black fondant that I tapered at both ends and then swept one side up and one side down. As you can see, it's an older version because these have lines in them, and once I put them on, I wasn't so happy with the lines, so I changed that out. But the principle's the same. I attached them with some royal icing and popped a couple of toothpicks right underneath where you won't be able to see the holes to secure them while it dried. Now on to making his eyes. I just took some white fondant and cut out some larger white circles. And then I took some black fondant and I used a large piping tip to cut out some smaller circles in black. I attached the black circles to the white circles with just a little bit of water. And as you can see, I put a little smile line on him by then too and just painted that in black. And then I attached the eyes with a little bit of water. Oh, and I also painted around the mouth. And then I put some tiny little pieces of white fondant in the middle of the black for his catch lights. To make his eyebrows, I just took some black fondant rolled into teardrop shapes and popped those above his eyes. And now to make the greenery at the top of his head, I've just taken some loud green fondant and cut that into triangular shapes and place that around the top of his head with a bit of water. Okay, so now we have to finish off that sombrero. So I'm taking the same color fondant that I used for the base of the sombrero. I have ganached that Rice Krispie sombrero just like I did with our chili pepper, covered it with the fondant, cutting off the excess here, and then I used a texture mat, which is sort of a woven texture mat, to give it a little bit of texture all the way around. Not sure if you can see it here, but now I'm using a board that is smaller than the base of the hat. I would have gone even smaller still if I was to do it again, I'd go smaller still. But I'm now covering that in the same color fondant and wrapping it over the edges also. There's also a hole drilled in the center of that because it has to go over our center pole. Smooth out those edges. And then make the hole in the center where I had drilled the hole earlier. To attach that board, which is the first thing we do to build the hat, I've just put some royal icing on the top of his head and slid the board right over top with the covered part downwards. I've put some more royal icing on the top of that board, and now I'm adding the base of the sombrero. You'll see now why I would have made it smaller. You see, it's jutting out a little bit, but that's okay, we'll fix that later. And then, of course, I added the top of the sombrero with some more royal icing. To mask that gap a little bit, I just took a strip of the same color fondant that I was using for the sombrero, and I attached it with some water between the base of the hat and the board that is holding the hat. If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so it's not perfect, but it does look a bit neater, and I cover it a bit more later. I'm adding a colored rope, which I'll show you how to make in just a moment, to the base of the sombrero. And I wanted to add another, so I've taken 2 snakes of fondant, one in green, one in yellow, and I'm sticking them together. And then I'm taking some water and putting it on the top between those 2 pieces and running another snake of red fondant in between. Then I take my hands and maneuver either way, and eventually it twists into a nice rope. I'm attaching this rope to the edge of the sombrero with a bit of water. Why do I keep saying sombrero? Like, you know, I'm Maltese, not Mexican. I wanted to make little pom-poms on his hat also, so I just took white pieces of fondant that I'd rolled into balls. I took an open star piping tip and just textured them into little puffy pom-poms. And attached that to the hat with a bit of water and did that all the way around. Now I'm making his maracas. Maracas, sound more Spanish? I don't know what I sound like. I've taken some toothpicks and I've just moistened them and rolled some white fondant over the top of them. Encased them in white fondant. And then to make the top, I've just made an egg sort of shaped piece of fondant, attached that to the toothpick, using another toothpick to attach it, and then I pinch it together with my fingers and roll it together. Put that into his little hand, and I use some royal icing to attach that to make sure it didn't come out. To do the board, well, you know, he's Mexican, desert, so I've just used some brown sugar and popped that around the board to make it look like sand. To decorate the maracas, I just coloured that in a combination of gel paste mixed with some food grade alcohol. Coloured the base in brown, the top in yellow, and then used red and green as my accent colours to paint some decoration. I went on later and added a little cactus to the board, and there he is. Our chili pepper in a sombrero because, well, why not? Well guys, that wraps that one up. Like I said, you can make this guy in cake. I just chose to make him in rice cereal treats because I wanted to keep him. Don't forget you can watch this video here to check out how I build my structures. And this was a really basic structure inside this chili cake. So I'm pretty sure you'll be able to work it out. It was just one pole, straight up, and some armature wire. Thank you so much for joining me again. If you like this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell below so that you are notified every time I upload new content. Well, once again, I've given you the tools and now it's your turn to go and get your cake on. Go and get your cake on. I said go and get your cake on. I'll see you next time. Bye.